Hi, my name is Ira. I'm a software engineer at Google, and I'm the founder of Magic. And it is an extreme pleasure of mine to introduce you to my mentee, Anika A. Anika is an 11th grader, and she came to Magic wanting to build a specific app, a fairly complicated app. She had very little programming experience. I have tons of programming experience, but I never built an app. So we learned together. And I'll let her tell you all about her project and her journey. But I wanted to highlight a few traits, attributes of Anika that I found most remarkable. She's intelligent, very modest at the same time, diligent, with amazing follow through. She just went above and beyond on any work that she had to do in between our meetings. And she's done a fantastic job. I'm very proud of her. And I could go on, but I'll keep it short. So, but the thing that impressed me most, there are many qualities about Anika, but the thing that impressed me most are her amazing soft skills. We met every week for 4 months. There was not a single meeting to which Anika was late. She was always before that. When I joined the meeting, and I usually tend to join a little earlier, she was there, always with a smile. It has been so much fun working with you, Anika. You have exceeded all my expectations. And with that, I'll hand the mic over to you so you can tell people about your project and your journey.
Thank you so much for the kind intro. Hello, everyone. My name is Anika A, and I am a junior from Massachusetts. So this is my mentor, Ira P. She has a PhD in electrical and computer engineering. As she mentioned, she is a staff engineer at Google. She was born and raised in India, but she currently lives in California. And she loves music, movies, and reading fiction. And she's actually currently learning how to play the piano, which I think is really cool. And I am so grateful to have her as my mentor. I couldn't have asked for anyone better. So a little bit about the project that I wanted to build coming into Magic. So my goal coming into the program was to A, learn Java and learn how to code, but B, as my mentor mentioned, I had a really specific goal in mind, which was to combat the day-to-day difficulties of having dietary restrictions. And the reason I cared so much about this issue is because just last year, my sister was diagnosed with celiac disease, which means that she can't eat meat. And she is a really big foodie, so that hit her pretty hard. And I just wanted to make something that could help her out. So coming into Magic, I had very minimal experience with coding. So I learned a lot throughout the program. And the first thing that I got started off with my mentor was App Inventor, which is a platform that was developed by Google and MIT and is used to develop apps for Android phones. And on App Inventor, essentially what I did was I got a little bit more familiar with code, and the main thing was how to lay out my app. And I made a really simple Bumblebee app on it, which was really fun. The other big thing that I did was learning Java. And I'm going to go a little bit more in depth a little bit later in the presentation, but learning Java was a huge focus throughout the program. So the app I made is called ScanSafe, and it is an Android app. And the way it works is that the user scans a barcode on a packaged food item, and then the app checks to see if it's safe for the user selected allergens. The way the app does it is it checks via a database of food items, which is called Open Food Facts. And it's just a huge database of food items where there are all the ingredients of almost any food that you can think of. And then if the app determines that that food item is unsafe to eat for your selected allergens, it then goes on to tell the user what specific ingredient makes it unsafe for them to eat. So these are just some of the wireframes that I made before building the app. And I just wanted to lay out what I wanted the app to look like before I actually went on and built the app. So I followed this pretty closely when I was writing the app itself. Starting on the very far left is the first page, and the very far right is the last page that I imagined. And you'll see later on in the demo that I tried to follow this as closely as possible. It was just really fun for me to actually lay out and visualize what I wanted my app to look like. So I had a lot of fun with the stage of the process. In terms of building ScanSafe itself, to make it, I used Android Studio, which is an IDE used to develop Android apps. And I started off with a few simple apps to get familiar with Android Studio and kind of understand coding better too. So the first app that I made was a simple Hello World app, following an Android tutorial online with my mentor. And the biggest takeaway I had from this was responsive UI design. So essentially when you turn your phone, does the text and all of the elements of the screen turn with it? And that's what I learned how to do with the Hello World app, which I thought was really cool. The other basic app I made was a diary app where the user can input any text and send it to another screen where all those diary entries are saved. And the big thing I learned from this was how to use different activities or different screens on an app. And then to put it all together, the third simple app that I made before building my real one, or the main project, was a random number generator. And this put together the elements of the two previous apps. There were a lot of pros with Android Studios, but here are just two that really stood out to me. The first, and I know this isn't unique to Android Studio, but this was my first time coding in a real IDE. So something that really stood out to me was that Android Studio provides suggestions to fix code when it's not working or when it could be more efficient, which I thought was super interesting because it was able to, at times when I had really big chunks of code that weren't working, it was able to simplify it sometimes down to one line and it would work then. So I thought it was really interesting to see how it would fix that code. The other thing I really liked about Android Studio is that it was really easy to use for designing the user interface. So you can drag and drop elements such as a button pretty simply on a screen, and then you can go and code it, which made it pretty easy to use. And I really liked that about it. So here's just a preview of my project. If you remember a few slides back, the wireframes were on there. So I just wanted to show them side by side. This is the home page, and on the left is the wireframe, and the right is the actual app itself. So as you can see over here, there are the allergens, the most common allergens that you can select off, and then the camera button, which will take you to the scanning screen. So I learned so much over the program that I just wanted to go a little bit more in depth about a few of the things that I did learn. First and foremost was learning Java. And mostly my mentor and I got started with this through Code Academy. And I learned about variables, conditionals, arrays, loops, object-oriented programming, which it took me a while to wrap my head around, but my mentor explained it in a lot of different ways and I was able to understand it afterwards. And then wireframing and more. The other really important thing I learned with Java was how to do an online search. And I know this sounds really simple, but it took me a while to understand how to search and get started with the code itself. So I learned how to search on Stack Overflow and W3 schools. And one thing that stood out to me in particular was towards the end of building my app, my mentor and I added a data structure called a hash map. And I had never worked with data structures before. So using Stack Overflow and W3 schools to get a better understanding of that really helped me. The other thing I learned about was Android Studio, which, as I mentioned before, is an IDE for developing Android apps. And to get started with this, my mentor and I followed a tutorial from Android where we built that basic Hello World app. And then one other thing that was really important on Android Studio is debugging. So essentially figuring out why the code isn't working if it's not working, which ended up being really useful and I used so many times throughout the process. I also learned how to use a web service call, and the purpose for this was to get the ingredients from the barcode itself. And in order to do this, I used a database called Open Food Facts, which, as I mentioned before, has a huge database of all the ingredients and food items. Finally, I learned about GitHub, which is a platform used for versioning and sharing code, so saving older versions and collaborating. And at the bottom, I linked my own GitHub page, which my mentor and I created. So if you do want to look at the code behind the app, I think this is where you can find it. There are so many other things I learned, but these are just a few things that I wanted to highlight before moving on. So throughout the program, again, there were so many highlights, but I'll try to keep it brief. So the first thing that really stood out to me was responsive UI design. And the reason this stood out to me so much was because I had always seen on the apps that I had on my phone, when I would move it around, the app would fit the orientation of my screen. And I never knew how that worked. And so actually building that was super rewarding. I think my parents are on this call. I remember the first time I got it to work, I went downstairs and I showed everyone in my family because I was really excited. The other thing, and I think this is the biggest highlight of the Magic program, was the meetings themselves. So between every meeting, I would have so many questions, and my mentor was so patient with me, and she explained everything in so many different ways until I understood them. So that really helped me learn a lot better, and I wouldn't have been able to learn without her. The other thing that I really enjoyed was wireframing. It was really fun for me to actually put my app with like pencil and paper and draw it out and visualize what I was actually thinking. And it served as a guide when I was writing the app itself. And finally, actually getting the code to work was a huge highlight for me because a lot of times when I would add something new to the app would crash. And so actually being able to modify it and get the app to do what I wanted it to do was extremely rewarding. In terms of lessons learned, the first one is just to try again, and to persevere even when things get hard. The second one was the importance of asking questions, which again, my mentor enabled me to do. And the third is just saving progress, which I realized later on. And this is where GitHub can be really useful, because if you make some changes to your code and it stops working, or you want to go back to an older version, it's important to have that to fall back on. So throughout the process, there were a few challenges that I faced. And the first one was just connecting the Android emulator, which is essentially where you can run the app on your own laptop screen. And the issue I had with this was I had some weird setting that was turned off on my Windows machine, so it wasn't working. But even when I turned that setting on, the emulator itself was really slow. So I ended up using a physical device. But then the physical device presented its own issues as well, because that initial device was an old model, so it wasn't compatible with Android Studio. But eventually I was able to find a device that worked, and I was able to test the app on that. Aside from that, the tutorials that I found were often in different languages. And so sometimes I would be really far into a tutorial, and then I would realize it wasn't working, and I would figure out that it was in Kotlin and not Java. And my app is in Java, so it took me a while sometimes to figure out what language the tutorial was in and actually getting that to work. In terms of a more specific challenge, for programming, oftentimes when you're comparing two things such as a string, you typically use two equal signs to see if they're the same. But at least for strings, you use the dot equals function, which I did not realize, and Android Studio didn't catch that as a mistake. So it took me a really long time to figure out that my code wasn't working because I was using the two equal signs instead of the function. In the future, there are a lot of things that I want to do to enhance my app. And the first one is just having an other option for allergens. So if a user has an allergy that isn't listed, they can add that themselves. Beyond that, I think it would be really cool to save the UI state for user preferences, which essentially means that when the user logs on, the boxes for their previously selected allergens are still checked off. I'm also hoping to add a confirmation page for the food item so that the app indicates that the food item you scanned for is actually scanning for that food item. And then I also want to do calls to multiple web services. So if it can't find the food item on one database, it can check the next with the hopes of finding it there. And this would essentially allow for more coverage of food items. In general, there are a few code improvements, such as using newer dependencies. I used a pretty old one, and I know that Google has a newer version, so I'm hoping to implement that. And generally, there are a few areas of the code that could be more efficient. And then one really big enhancement that I'm hoping to work towards is recommended food items if it finds that the food is unsafe. So, for example, if I'm scanning for Cheez-Its and it doesn't work with my diet, I want to be able to find an item that tastes similar but does work for my diet. So the app would recommend that. So this is the app itself, and this is the homepage of the app where you can select the allergens that you're going to be scanning for. And here are just the most common allergens that I was able to find online. So I'm just going to be scanning for gluten, and when you click the camera button at the bottom, it will take you to a place where you can scan. And again, this is just scanning for Cheez-Its. So here it tells us that the food item is not safe to eat, and then it gives us the ingredient that is making it unsafe to eat. So since I checked for gluten, it's telling us that there is wheat in Cheez-Its, which is a gluten product, so it's not safe for my diet. Now I'm going to check for multiple ingredients. So gluten, eggs, milk, and soy. And just getting the same product, we'll see what happens. So here it again tells us that it's not safe to eat, and for each allergen, it gives you what ingredient is making it unsafe for you. And then finally, I'm just going to check for something that I know is not contained in the Cheez-Its, so sesame. And it tells us that the food item is safe to eat. So that is all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to my mentor for all of your help along the way. I really could not have done this without you.